Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to take a look at the Voigtländer Ultron 40mm f2. This is the SL2 model for a Canon EF mount. So I'm here to take a look at this tiny little optic, less than an inch long. Let's see what kind of optical performance it can actually muster up. Obviously, you have a much cheaper alternative in Canon's own EF 40mm f2.8 STM lens. And so this lens is going to be more than twice as much. And so does the image quality justify that additional expense? We're going to jump in and take a look at a variety of comparisons to that lens, also to Canon's 50mm f1.8, and even to Tamron's 45mm f1.8 VC lens. And so let's see what we come up with here. Okay, we're going to start by just doing an overall sharpness comparison between the Voigtlander and then probably its most natural competitor, and that's Canon's own 40mm f2.8 STM lens. So as we can see in the middle of the frame, f2 versus f2.8, that the Voigtlander is definitely outclassed in terms of absolute sharpness here. And so the Canon definitely looks stronger in the center. Towards the edges, they look pretty much similar, but there's a little bit more chromatic aberration on the Voigtlander, although it's really not a bad offender overall in that regard. And so a slight bit more sharpness for the Canon in the right corner, but it's particularly in the center where it outclasses. Now if we stop down the Voigtlander to f2.8 and kind of compare it apples to apples, the situation really is the same. There's more sharpness here and contrast for the Canon, and you can definitely see that really across the frame, although once again out towards the edges. The advantage is minimal at best, but still I do favor the Canon in an absolute sense looking out towards the edge. If we stop down to f4, it really tightens up here, and I would say that looking at them, there still is a little bit of an advantage to the Canon lens, but it is probably so minor as to be kind of a statistical anomaly at this point, and you probably won't see much of a difference in the real world. Once again, both of them look okay, but not exceptional at the side when stopped down. And both of these seem to favor the right side just a little bit, but I would say looking between them, the Canon is still the winner, stopped down to f2.8. We'll now compare against another competitor, and that is the Tamron 45mm f1.8. Now the Tamron, of course, has autofocus. It has a professional build grade, of course, as does the Voigtlander, but the Tamron does include weather sealing, it has image stabilization, and it has autofocus. So, I mean, as a point of comparison, it's definitely a tempting alternative, although it's obviously a much, much larger lens. We can see that, unsurprisingly, the Tamron at f2, it definitely is the sharper, more contrasty lens, and it really is an exceptional lens, except for the fact that it does suffer from some chromatic aberration. If we look towards the edge of the frame, the Tamron is definitely the winner here, although there is that fringing there that is quite obvious as well. Looking over at the right side of the frame, definitely favors the Tamron in terms of the overall contrast and sharpness. Now if we stop them both down to f2.8, the Tamron is now, of course, stunningly sharper overall by comparison, and it really at f2.8 is an incredibly sharp lens. We can also see that as the chromatic aberration has started to clear up, its corner performance is starting to look better here as well. And that's true on both sides of the frame. So just for the fun of it, we'll go with a cheaper alternative, and this is Canon's, I think, least expensive lens, the 50mm f1.8, but it does offer a lot of bang for the buck overall. And so if we compare these in the center at f2, the edge now I would say goes to the Voigtlander, and the Canon's looking a little blurrier by comparison, but the Canon, I would say, has caught up along the edge, and at f2 it looks pretty good, and I would say is a hint better than the Voigtlander. Looking at the right side, the Voigtlander looks a little bit better on this side, I would say, and sharper in the details there. Here's a few other examples that have been processed, and so here's an application, some food photography here. Very, very nice color, even though there is some processing here. Here also you can see a nice bokeh, and we'll look more at that in just a second. But again, having that along in a compact package allows you to deliver really kind of cinematic, great looking results. Here's another example here, and this is shot at wide open f2, and so nice bokeh and nice handling of everything here. You can see just a little bit of chromatic aberration there, but overall for such a challenging, very bright light, this is a pleasing result. So this will also be a tempting option for those that are shooting APS-C, where on Nikon it delivers a 60mm equivalent and on Canon a 64mm, a useful focal length to be sure, and so we can see that it transitions to APS-C really pretty well. You know, you can tell that the more demanding, this is on a Canon 80D, so it's a pretty demanding 24 megapixel APS-C sensor. And so out towards the edges, because it's cropped, you're getting a little bit better result, although obviously it's definitely not out-resolving the sensor here. But overall, I think that's a pretty nice result. Now at f2.8 compared to the Canon 40mm pancake, we can see that once again the Canon is giving a better contrast and sharpness in the center. It's not as big an advantage, but it's definitely still there. Looking out towards the edge of the frame, it's close, but I would say there's still a little bit more contrast and detail on the Canon. And looking at the right side, the same is definitely true there. Compared to the Canon 50mm f1.8, here on APS-C, the 50mm f1.8 makes that transition fairly well. In the center, it's hard to declare a winner. I'm seeing a little bit more chromatic aberration on the Voigtlander, which is surprisingly well controlled on the Canon in the center of the frame. A little bit here out towards the edge, and you know, maybe a slight uptick for the Voigtlander on the edges, but still, if I look at that section, I like what I see from the Canon, the cheaper Canon option better. On the right side of the frame, you know, Voigtlander may be a hair better, and I would say that the Canon is not, as we saw with the full frame, it's not really great on the right side of the frame. So here's a couple of APS-C samples shot wide open. Very beautiful color rendering and nice handling of light here. Detail looks pretty good, I would say, and I certainly am happy with that result. And here's another example here. Obviously a very high contrast transition with the light, so we're seeing a little bit of purple fringing here, but overall it's managed quite well, and the end result is one that is very pleasing. Now I also shot it on a Sony a7R II, where it was a lot of fun to play with because the a7R II is so rewarding to manual focus lenses. And as we can see on that very high 42 megapixel sensor, there's lots of great detail here across the frame, and this was shot through a window, which, you know, might reduce contrast a little bit. But as we can see all across here, there's a lot that is resolved there, and you know, it's pretty impressive how much detail. This is at f5.6, and so I'm very happy with that result. So here's just a street scene that is shot on the a7R II. We can see, of course, you know, really nice detail rendered there, and you know, nothing to complain about in terms of the global look. Here, once again, this is closer to minimum focus, and we've got, you know, plenty of information there. A little bit of chromatic aberration in the defocused area, but you know, not bad at all. This is also on the a7R II, and so again, lots of detail there. It's a fun lens in that kind of application. Here's another one of my kitty here, and just showing you, I went to a monochrome, but I would say I'm very happy with the overall look of that image. Now the Voigtlander is quite interesting when you point it into really bright sun. You can see that there is some veiling across the scene here, so a little bit of a loss of contrast, but more interesting is the unique ghosting pattern here, which actually kind of forms a circle. And as a result, I think that a lot of people will find that of some artistic value. And if you play around with, say, the dehaze slider on Lightroom, it's pretty easy to remove the overall haze that's there, and you end up with a result that is quite pleasing. Now, a lot of lenses, when you stop them down, as I've done here, you actually create more ghosting. That's not the case with the Voigtlander, but as you can see, it actually creates a result that is more like a wide open, just a bit of hazing and veiling there. And so I think that that's also promising. You know, you can do a little bit of processing and get a lot of artistic value out of that. Here's just another few examples here. You can see that ring being formed there. And so I would say that as far as flare goes, I kind of like what's happening here because I feel like it does have artistic merit. And even if you stop it down just a bit, this is f3.5, you can see that ring is removed if you don't want that. And you know, there's no distracting ghosting pattern in other places. So all things considered, I think that that's really promising because you have a very localized flare pattern, ghosting pattern, and you can really kind of put it where you want it in the frame. Now, if we look at the bokeh from the lens, we find that there is, at the center of the frame, there is a little bit of busyness, just a slight bit of onion patterning here that's present. And, you know, nice sharpness, really looking at our subject here. A little bit of cat eye effect towards the edge of the frame. Now, if we stop that down to f2.8, we do see the beginning of the aperture blades, 9 aperture blades, so a nonagonal effect starting to show up here. What is interesting, however, is if we compare this with the Canon 40mm f2.8. And so the Canon, you know, even with them occupying the same portion of the frame, the Canon is a little bit sharper. But what we're going to find, because of the larger maximum aperture of the Voigtlander, it actually produces much larger bokeh highlights, even at equivalent aperture of f2.8. On the plus side, the Canon is a little bit smoother in the center and but of course with it stopped down, the Voigtlander is delivering circular highlights more consistently across the frame. If you want to look further with the Voigtlander here, now stop down to f4, we've got pretty consistent circular results across the frame, and a little bit of that nonagonal shape is showing, and you know, a little bit of aperture blade curving that's starting to show up in the highlights also. And then at f5.6, more of the same, but really the Voigtlander is doing a pretty good job of maintaining a nice circular aperture even at these smaller aperture values. Now, if we put both of these lenses at their native minimum focus distance, you can see that the Canon definitely has a better magnification value than the Voigtlander does in its native form. The native form is 0.14 times, not all that impressive really, and the Canon is a little bit better result. If you throw the close-up lens adapter onto the Voigtlander, it has a dramatically greater potential for creating bokeh near minimum focus because of the close-up adapter. And so as you can see, the situation is now reversed with the circular highlights being much larger and much softer from the Voigtlander, along with its overall magnification. So the real-world bokeh here, this is an image I really quite like. You know, there's nice detail here on my plane of focus, but then it's nice and soft here. Here's another example here, and you know, there's not really anything that's ugly or overly busy there. And so if you use the lens like this, and this is without the adapter on, just its native magnification, I'm quite happy with those results. Here's another example within a friend's shop, and so this is actually his apron. And again, nice color. Color rendition is really nice out of the lens. So this has been processed a bit, but it also gives you a look at the overall focus fall off. And so we've got, you know, very nice sharpness where it matters, and then we have a nice defocus area beyond that. Color rendition is definitely a strength of the lens, and here I've, you know, thrown the sun into the frame with the lens stopped down, and there it shows really good flare resistance and has delivered a beautiful color result during this golden hour sequence here. Here's another example where I've done minimal processing just to balance light, but as you can see, color rendition is really nice. These were shot in Alberta here. Here's another example here, and so, you know, I think that as far as the overall drawing and rendering, it's quite nice. So So as you can see, I was able to use the lens on a variety of different platforms, and including 2 different Canon full-frame bodies, 5D Mark IV, along with a 6D body combined with an EGS focus screen. I used it on a Canon EOS 80D and then the Sony a7R II. And I found that really in all of those applications, I was able to get very nice results from the lens. And there are a lot of things that I like about the performance from the lens. At the same time, I think it's safe to conclude that really in no way is it exceptional in its image quality performance. It does a lot of things well. Flare resistance is good. Chromatic aberration is controlled fairly well. It does pretty good when it comes to the overall resolution and contrast from the lens. And the bokeh quality is pretty decent as well. But in none of those ways does it really stand out from the pack. The thing where it really stands out is, of course, in its compact size, and when compared to Canon's 40mm, it has, of course, both the compact size along with a little more high-end color rendering and definitely a higher grade of build quality. At the same time, it also has the impediment of having manual focus only. And so I think that in some ways, for many shooters, this little Voigtlander lens is going to end up in no man's land, where it doesn't really differentiate itself enough to stand out for them and to keep them from going for more popular alternatives. Join me one final episode where I give my final verdict, and I also do a perhaps surprise comparison to an alternative that I think might suit your budget even better and provides pretty fantastic results. You can follow along in my ongoing image gallery that I've been adding to now for months, and in the description down below. And of course, if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.